Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, lovers and seekers, those who are lost and those who are found. Tonight we will be looking at a fragment. This one is titled, A History of Daggers and Queens, and the body of this fragment reads as follows. On the one hand, in the other hand, a history of daggers and queens. On the one hand, in the other hand. That being said, let's get started, shall we? A history of daggers and queens. Provenance and first impressions. When encountering a fragmentary document such as a history of daggers and queens, the immediate question is not what does it say, but why does it survive as it does? Found artifacts rarely present themselves whole. Their authority emerges precisely from incompleteness, edges burned, margins torn, meanings fractured. This fragment appears to be the remnant of a longer historical, philosophical, or political work, one that was either deliberately interrupted or incidentally lost. The title itself carries a deliberate gravity. A history of implies scope, duration, and method. This is not myth, not poetry, not rumor. It claims the posture of record and examination. Yet the subjects of this history, daggers and queens, are not neutral categories. They are symbols saturated with implication. From the outset, the artifact positions itself between violence and sovereignty, intimacy and spectacle, the concealed and the ceremonial, the subtitle, or perhaps epigraph, on the one hand and the other hand, complicates this further. Grammatically unfinished, philosophically circular, the phrase resists closure. It suggests simultaneity rather than sequence. Whatever the document intended to argue, it was not interested in simple causation. The presence of the blank line, an underscore or void, beneath the phrase reinforces the sense of rupture. This is not merely missing text, it is acknowledged absence. The scribe, compiler, or preserver left space intact rather than attempting reconstruction. This restraint implies reverence or perhaps fear. The title as a compressed thesis. Titles of historical works often serve as claims of legitimacy. To name a work a history of daggers and queens is to assert that these two forces are not incidental but structurally linked. The ampersand is crucial here. Unlike and, which implies addition, the ampersand suggests entanglement. Daggers are not merely present in the era of queens. They are bound to queens as instruments, threats, or inevitabilities. Daggers differ from swords, spears, or armies. They are weapons of proximity. A dagger requires closeness, trust, or deception. It functions in silence, indoors, often unseen. Queens, conversely, are public figures. They embody legitimacy, continuity, and ritualized power. The juxtaposition implies a history not of battlefields but of chambers, corridors, marriages, councils, and bedsides. Thus the title may be read as a thesis in miniature that sovereignty, especially embodied in queenship, is inseparable from intimate violence. Power, when centralized and personalized, invites threats that are equally personal. Gendered power and the choice of queens. The deliberate use of queens rather than kings is one of the artifact's most telling features. Queens historically occupy a more ambiguous position within power structures. They are rulers, consorts, regents, mothers, symbols, and sometimes hostages of their own legitimacy. Their authority is often contested, conditional, or mediated through relationships. Daggers in this context may represent the unique dangers faced by queens: assassination, poisoning, betrayal by confidants, or elimination through marriage politics. The history implied here may not be one of masculine conquest, but of constrained power, rule exercised within narrow margins where missteps invite lethal correction. Alternatively, the pairing may suggest that queens themselves wield daggers metaphorically or literally. Court intrigue, manipulation, strategic cruelty, and calculated silence can be as deadly as steel. The dagger may thus symbolize agency within constraint. The artifact does not clarify whether daggers are aimed at queens or wielded by them. This ambiguity appears intentional. On the one hand and the other hand, philosophy of duality, the fragmentary phrase beneath the title, functions as a philosophical anchor. On the one hand is traditionally followed by a counterbalancing clause, on the other hand. Here, the phrase collapses both halves into one continuous motion. There is no separation, no resolution. This suggests a worldview in which contradictions coexist. Authority and vulnerability, legitimacy and violence, protection and threat are not opposites, but concurrent realities. A queen holds the symbol of rule in one hand and the means, or threat, of violence in the other. Or perhaps she holds trust in one hand and betrayal in the other, never knowing which will strike. The phrase also gestures toward moral ambiguity. The document does not promise judgment. It offers balance without synthesis. History, it implies, does not resolve into clarity. It merely accumulates tension. The missing text as meaning. The blank space beneath the phrase is not passive. In manuscript culture, empty space often signals reverence, censorship, or loss too dangerous to restore. This gap may mark a suppressed argument, a list of names, or a thesis deemed unacceptable by later hands. One possibility is that the missing section contained examples, specific queens, specific daggers, specific events. Names invite blame. Removing them allows the text to survive in abstraction. Another possibility is that the blank space once held a conclusion, deliberately erased to prevent the work from being weaponized. The fact that the title and epigraph remain suggests that these elements were either overlooked by censors or considered too ambiguous to prosecute. Ambiguity here is survival. Authorship, insider or observer. The tone implied by the fragment suggests an author with proximity to power. The language is not populist. It does not explain daggers or queens. It assumes familiarity. This points toward an audience embedded within elite circles, courtiers, advisors, scholars, or rulers themselves. The author may have been someone who witnessed the mechanisms of power from within, but lacked the authority to alter them. Writing history becomes an act of preservation rather than reform. The document reads less like accusation and more like recognition. It is equally plausible that the author was a queen, or someone writing in her voice. The careful balance, the refusal to moralize, the awareness of duality all suggest lived experience rather than theoretical speculation. Historical function, warning, record, or meditation. What was this document for? As a warning, it reminds future rulers that power invites proximity, and proximity invites betrayal. As a record, it attempts to catalog patterns rather than events, how violence repeats, how authority attracts its counterforce. As a meditation, it allows the reader to sit with contradiction without demanding resolution. The fragmentary nature suggests that whatever its function, it outlived its safety. Perhaps it circulated privately, copied selectively, or quoted without attribution. Over time, what remained was what could not be easily condemned. The ethics of intimate violence. Daggers are ethically distinct from open warfare. They imply secrecy, personal intent, and irreversible decisions made without spectacle. By pairing daggers with queens, the artifact may be questioning the moral cost of maintaining order. Is violence more reprehensible when hidden, or is it merely more honest? Queens often rule through symbols, ceremonies, and continuity, but the dagger reminds us that these are upheld by force, even when unseen. The document's refusal to condemn or praise suggests a mature ethical stance. Power cannot be disentangled from violence, only managed. Time, memory, and selective survival. Artifacts do not survive randomly. They are preserved by those who find them useful, resonant, or harmless. The survival of this fragment suggests that its abstraction protected it. It speaks in symbols rather than accusations. Over time, specificity decays first. What remains is structure. This fragment preserves the structure of power relations rather than their details. In doing so, it becomes timeless, modern resonance. Though the artifact speaks in archaic symbols, its relevance persists. Daggers have changed form. Now they may be laws, narratives, scandals, or technologies, but the dynamic remains. Power invites intimate threats. Authority demands constant negotiation between legitimacy and force. The phrase on the one hand and the other hand reads uncannily modern. It mirrors contemporary discomfort with binaries, with moral absolutes. It reflects a world in which leaders must embody contradictions without collapsing under them. Why the fragment matters. This artifact matters not because it tells us what happened, but because it models how to think about power. It refuses simplicity. It resists heroism. It acknowledges danger without dramatization. In a historical landscape dominated by triumphal narratives, this fragment whispers instead of shouts. It suggests that the most accurate histories are often the quietest. Conclusion: what we hold and what holds us. A history of daggers and queens survives as a fragment because fragments are harder to kill. Its title holds violence and authority in the same frame. Its epigraph denies resolution. Its silence speaks as loudly as its words. As a found artifact, it offers no comfort. It offers recognition. Power is never held cleanly. It is always balanced on the one hand and the other hand between what must be shown and what must remain hidden. And perhaps that is the most honest history any document can leave behind. The ampersand as an ideological device. Returning to the ampersand, often overlooked as mere typography, it warrants sustained attention. In manuscript traditions, the ampersand frequently appears in practical or mercantile texts where efficiency mattered. Its use here in what appears to be a reflective or historical document is therefore deliberate. The ampersand collapses space. It denies hierarchy. Daggers are not subordinate to queens, nor queens to daggers. They are bound in a single gesture. This binding suggests that the author rejected linear causality. Queens do not cause daggers, nor do daggers merely respond to queens. Instead, the two exist in a recursive relationship. Power generates threat. Threat reshapes power. The ampersand then becomes an ideological hinge, a visual shorthand for inevitability. If this document were displayed in a museum, the ampersand would likely draw scholarly commentary precisely because it resists ornamental explanation. It functions as argument, the possibility of a suppressed genre. One compelling hypothesis is that a history of daggers and queens belonged to a genre that no longer exists in full internal histories written for ruling classes but never intended for public circulation. Such works would differ from official chronicles, which justify reigns, and from popular histories, which mythologize them. Instead, this may have been a mirror text, a work meant to be read by those in power as a reflection of their conditions. Medieval and early modern political thought includes many such texts, often framed as advice, but this fragment lacks instruction. That absence suggests either confidence in the reader's intelligence or a deliberate refusal to prescribe solutions. If this was a suppressed genre, its disappearance makes sense. Such texts would be dangerous, too honest to endorse, too insightful to ignore. Silence as political technology. The document's restraint, the absence of examples, dates, or names, can be read as an early form of political self-preservation. Silence becomes a technology. By refusing to name, the author avoids direct accusation. By refusing to moralize, the author avoids heresy or treason. In this sense, the artifact demonstrates how intellectual work adapts under pressure. Ideas that cannot be spoken directly evolve into symbols. Daggers and queens are not merely metaphors, they are shields. The blank line beneath the subtitle reinforces this. It is not merely missing content, it is withheld content. The author may have chosen to leave it blank, understanding that what is not written cannot be used as evidence. Material speculation: where might this have lived? Speculating on the physical context of the artifact opens further interpretive space. The fragment could have been the title page of a codex whose interior pages were destroyed. Alternatively, it may have been an inscription inside a cover, a private reminder rather than a public declaration. If found among personal effects, perhaps in a chest, a desk, or a reliquary, it would suggest private contemplation. If found in an archive, it suggests institutional tolerance of ambiguity. The lack of illumination or ornament, implied by the starkness of the text, suggests seriousness rather than display. This was not a celebratory object. It was functional, even austere. Queens as temporal anchors. Another interpretation is that queens serve as temporal anchors in history. Unlike offices or armies, queens are embodied. Their reigns are remembered through marriages, births, deaths, and scandals. Daggers, then, may represent the disruptions that puncture continuity. The artifact may thus be less about individual queens and more about the fragility of dynastic time. Daggers interrupt lineage. They end stories abruptly. A history of daggers and queens becomes a history of interrupted futures. This reading aligns with the fragment's refusal to conclude. A broken history cannot end cleanly. The reader's role in completing the text. As a found artifact, this document demands participation. The reader is compelled to fill the blank space mentally. Which queens, which daggers, which hands hold which objects? This participatory quality may have been intentional. By forcing readers to supply their own examples, the text becomes universally applicable. Every reader brings their own history of power and violence to the fragment. In this way, the artifact renews itself with each reading. It is not static. It adapts. Comparative absence, what is not here. Equally important is what the document excludes. There is no mention of kings, wars, gods, or nations. The scope is intimate rather than expansive. This exclusion suggests a focus on micropolitics rather than grand narratives. The artifact does not concern itself with conquest or borders. It concerns itself with survival within constraint. That focus alone sets it apart from dominant historical traditions. Memory without monument. Most histories seek permanence through scale, monuments, volumes, genealogies. This fragment achieves permanence through compression. It distills centuries of experience into a single balanced phrase. In doing so, it resists monumentalization. There is no statue for daggers and queens together. There is only tension. This may explain why the fragment survived at all. It does not threaten institutions directly. It merely tells the truth too quietly to be erased completely. Ethical neutrality as moral stance. The artifact's neutrality is not indifference. It is an ethical choice. By refusing to assign blame, it acknowledges complexity. Queens are neither victims nor villains exclusively. Daggers are neither purely evil nor purely just. This ethical posture aligns with mature historical consciousness. It accepts that power is exercised by humans under pressure, not abstractions acting freely. Such neutrality would be unsettling to regimes that prefer clear heroes and enemies. Final reflection: why this fragment endures. The endurance of a history of daggers and queens lies in its honesty. It does not pretend that power can be purified. It does not offer redemption. It simply observes. As a found artifact, it reminds us that some truths cannot be preserved whole. They survive only in pieces, in symbols, in balanced phrases that refuse to tip. The fragment ends where it must, in the reader's hands. On the one hand, we inherit authority. In the other, we inherit its consequences. The artifact does not tell us what to do with them. It merely insists that we acknowledge both.